Welcome today. We are talking about the ins and outs of UNLV graduate student financial aid considerations. It is about tax time. Why does that matter? Everyone's thinking about numbers, everyone's thinking about finances about now. Of course, you think about this stuff all throughout the year, but this is another time when especially relevant. But we're delighted to have Mr. Norm Bedford, who's come all the way across campus from student financial aid to be here. But this is the ideal person, I think, to hear about these issues with respect to graduate student concerns, both those who are here today, but also those who may be watching the video. That Mr. Bedford said he's been here since 2007, but prior to coming to UNLV, has worked on similar issues in Illinois and Ohio for what amounts to about 2.5 decades. So he's been long thinking about these things, and again, he intimately knows what kinds of financial considerations graduate students here at UNLV tend to face, and also the kinds of challenges or kinds of strategies they may employ to try to address those head on. So with that said, we'll turn it over to Mr. Bedford. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Peter. So yeah, a little bit of background about myself. The schools I've worked at have been Ohio State University, Eastern Illinois University, and Bowling Green State University. And this October I'll be completing my 26th year in financial aid, so I'd like to think that I've really helped serve, like tens of thousands of students over the course of my career, helping them achieve their educational goals and dreams, and that's kind of a cool thing because it keeps you young for sure. I'm also a first-generation college student. Received financial aid at Ohio State. I came from a low socioeconomic status. I received a Pell Grant and actually graduated and moved on to a master's degree with Eastern Illinois University, and so kind of here I am today. So my background, as you can see, is primarily in a four-year public institution, which is exactly where we're at today. So that's kind of my background, and feel free when we kind of go over some of these slides, if there's a question or I'm not clear about something, just interject and we'll clear it up for you. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the first slide. And when I went to, formulate this presentation, the ins and outs of graduate financial aid assistance, that's really a broad, deep topic. And we would be here like all day if we had to try to cover each and every single thing. So I won't terrorize you with that and bore you with that. So with financial aid, very honestly, it's not the most uplifting topic. It tends to be sometimes boring to people. There's a lot of acronyms and terms, a lot of lingo that the government has purposefully created to make it confusing. So I've tried to narrow it down to just the things that I've heard over my years of experience, like the most common things that I get from you guys, like why, or how come this, or how come that. So the first one is, some of our students think that financial aid should pay for all of their living expenses. And the answer is really yes and no. So what's the problem? So the problem is there's a big difference between what a student thinks financial aid should pay versus what the Department of Education thinks would be a legitimate expense. And the Department of Education never designed federal financial aid to pay for all your living expenses. Just very simply, that's just not the way it was ever designed. So right there, you can see where financial aid and students kind of butt heads right there, because we're not congruent with each other. So we need to talk about what the true educational expenses for your education would be versus what your other living expenses probably are. So here's a lot of common things that students ask us to pay for, or they have these types of expenses. So when you go to college, you should really be thinking about basic sustenance living. So if you already have a home, or a condo that you're making payments on, if you have a car payment, right away, boom, you're out the gate, you're behind with being able to pay for college. Or if you have credit card expenses, boom, out the gate, you're behind. So these are the types of things that would not be really applicable to your financial aid paying for. Now, can you use your financial aid to pay for these things? I suppose you can. There's no financial aid police, kind of looking around and making sure that you're spending money appropriately. But again, if you're using the money for these types of expenses, you're really not living within your means for college purposes. And it kind of stinks because there's a lot of people who are adults and they're like, what do you mean I can't use financial aid to pay for food for my children's spouse or partner? Financial aid wasn't designed to pay for your kids, put food in your kids' mouth. It was designed to put food in your mouth. So, and that's a hard thing for people to swallow. Or financial aid wasn't designed to put food on or clothes on your kids' backs. It was designed to give you a modest clothing allowance to put clothes on your back. So if you're trying to stretch those financial aid dollars across multiple categories, again, you're going to have some problems paying for college or borrowing more than what you need to fit that into your economic schedule. So this is really what financial aid can pay for. And it's tuition and fees, it's books and supplies, it's a modest food allowance for yourself, it's some transportation expenses. But you just said, well, wait a minute, Norm, you said I can't make my car payment with transportation. Well, you're not supposed to. So think of this. Federal financial aid was only supposed to pay for the operating costs for you to get to school. Gas, kind of oil, bus pass, those kinds of things. It was never supposed to be paying for your depreciation on your car, the interest to the bank, those kinds of things. Now, a lot of people have those, and that's great, but you can kind of see where I'm going with this. So, federal financial aid is only supposed to pay for your basic sustenance living for educational costs. Anything outside of that is going to be a struggle for you. So that's why a lot of times students and financial aid are not congruent in terms of, I have all these living expenses. And we understand that, and we're sympathetic. But the Department of Education just won't allow us to give you extra consideration or an allowance for that type of expense. So, clear as mud?
You listed professional subscriptions. Are you talking about journal subscriptions, memberships?
Yep. Professional subscriptions. Now let's say with the College of Nursing, we already know that they have professional membership subscriptions, like journals that they have to read. So we factor that into their cost of attendance. With a regular graduate, usually with most schools, unless the student tells the financial aid office, I'm in this unique program, I've got $300 in subscriptions I have to, or professional dues. We won't factor that in unless you tell us. And if you tell us that and you can document that, you can certainly appeal that as a legitimate educational expense. So not everybody knows that. A lot of students talking about costs. I can't tell you the number of times a student will say to us in financial aid, how much do I owe? It's like, what do you mean, how much do you owe? We'll be more than happy to help you and tell you how much you owe because we have access to the system. But number one, you're asking the wrong office. Financial aid doesn't bill you. We just give you the money to pay your bill. Cashiering and student account office creates that bill for you. So we can, in general, tell you, like, well, you owe this, but if you have questions about the detail of your bill, you really need to talk to the cashiering office. The other thing is we'll have students wait on hold for 20, 25 minutes at the beginning of the semester, and they'll say, how much do I owe? And you're like, wait a minute, don't you have access to my UNLV? You can log in right now and see how much you owe. But if you want to wait 20, 25 minutes on the phone, I'll oblige you. That's a majority of our calls. So a lot of students say, why does it take so long to get through to financial aid? Well, we have students that aren't using the online services to get answers. That's one thing. But we'll still have students, they're oblivious. Not all students. Well, I mean, we have really good students here at this school and in the schools that I've been at. But there's still a majority of students that they just want to call and get an answer and get that personal touch. They don't want the online stuff. And they're oblivious to how much they owe. They'll enroll at this institution and they'll have no idea how much the costs are at all. It happens all the time. And it's scary. So for the folks that want to go that route on our webpage, we actually it's prominently there. And if they click on those, we'll tell them how much it costs on average for tuition and fees. Those basic educational costs we just discussed, they're right there. And we tell students up front what we'll cover. And so again, if they have like a car payment or a mortgage payment or credit card debt, do you see those kinds of things listed in there? And the answer is no. So a reasonable person should conclude that financial aid isn't going to pay for that. The other thing is, and I know I'm using an undergrad calculator here, and it's really grad, but you get the gist. The Cashiering and Student Accounts Office has a very good calculator, and it says if you take X amount of credit hours, you're a new student, continuing student, international student, non-resident student, it will actually break down per, to the cents what your bill would be, at least for tuition and fees. So, everything that is known to man in the universe that is not considered classified is a search engine away. So the questions that I am still getting from students today are the same as they were in 1989 when I started in financial aid. Like what do I owe? What's the difference between a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan? When is my tuition and fees due? Now, the internet was really at its infancy at that point in the game in 1989. It wasn't quite mainstream. Remember America Online, dialing in with modems, maybe you don't. So why am I still getting these questions, these basic questions like today when the internet has just so much great legitimate information out there, or schools have really devoted a lot of information out there. We've designed our website so that if you spend a little bit of time, a couple clicks away, we believe that 90% of all financial aid questions can be answered between the website and my UNLV. And there are complicated cases out there. I get that we need the more personal touch. And I just don't think that our graduate students, or even our undergraduate students, are using it as effectively as they can. Some of them are, some of them are not. Okay, student issue 2. Some students think that a federal student loan is not really financial aid. And they tell this to me. They're like, why? It's a loan, I have to pay it back anyway with interest, right? So why do you consider it financial aid? Well, here's my scenario. So walk into a bank and tell the loan representative that you need $20,500, which is what you can borrow per year in federal student loans. I have no credit, I have no assets, I have no collateral, I have no cosigner. I'm not sure when I can pay back the loan. Maybe I'll pay it back in 10 years. Maybe it'll be 25 years, depending on how much I borrow. I want it at the very lowest interest rate that you can give me, and I'm good for the money. Now smile to the loan representative and tell them, can I still get the money? What do you think that loan rep is going to tell you? They're probably going to tell you, here's your sucker, right? I think you still get suckers at the bank. And they're going to probably tell you to get out. So when a student tells me that a loan shouldn't be considered financial aid, I'm like, no, because the taxpayers of this country are subsidizing your credit risk, okay? Because you could default on this loan in the future. There's no other way that you can get this kind of money under this scenario anywhere else in this country. You can't walk into a bank and do it, but you can do it with the federal student loan program. So that's why I say it's considered financial aid. Question?
Is that part of the reason why when you file for bankruptcy, student loans are never forgivable?
We're going to cover that in a couple slides.
All right, thank you.
So we will talk about bankruptcy again. Student issue 3, borrowing more than what you should without regard or little regard to expected earnings when you graduate. And this kind of gets a little bit political because you don't want to say one major is not worth more than another major because you don't want to direct students that way. But I think students really need to make educated, good choices when it comes to doing what they value in life, what's near and dear to their heart, what's really their passion, and how they're going to pay the bills later. I think it would be a mistake for a student to accumulate $100,000 in student loan indebtedness and come out of graduate school expecting to make $40,000. That's probably going to be a problem for you. Your debt is you don't want your student loan payments to really be more than 10 to 12% of your income that you're taking in. That's a good rule of thumb. And some people might even argue that's your pre-tax income. So the pie gets sliced a little bit smaller. So what's the problem with this? Well, you have the potential to indenture yourself over a lifetime of earnings. No one wants to work 25, 30, 40 years. That's a long time to work. You're going to get tired. Young people eventually become old, and if you've got this energy now in your mid-20s, it's going to probably be very different in your 40s and 50s. Your health might not be the same as it is, in your 20s as it is in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. So you need to think about some of these things smartly when you borrow. You have the potential to lower your FICO score, which is what they use for credit, for an extended period of time. Your debt to income ratios could be skewed until you start paying that off, and it's going to be years that they'll be skewed. Higher APRs, because you may be viewed as a credit risk, or not as strong as someone else with a higher FICO score. You may be asked to put more money down on large purchases, and those things should make sense. Now there's data out on this, and I don't know how conclusive it is, but it's starting to be studied where they're actually asking students, have you delayed the purchase of a home, a new vehicle, getting married, having children? You may have to move back into your parents' home. And that would scare me the most, because I don't think my parents want me to move in with them as much as, vice versa. You may have to have roommates to share living expenses with to pay down your loans for a number of years. I wouldn't want roommates at the age of 48 at this point in my life. This is another one, and this kind of tears at your heart a little bit. Let's say you meet a significant other, and you're dating, and it's going good, and all of a sudden, you're kind of sharing, your little life secrets, and you find out that this person you like has $100,000 in loan indebtedness, and you already have $50,000. You're like, holy cow! If we get serious, do I really want to help? I've got enough financial problems of my own. Do I really want to help this person and help pay down their loan indebtedness? Is that a deal breaker for the relationship? These are the studies that are starting to, how is loan indebtedness changing the life characteristics of students? And I think they're good things to look at. It's real. So for our students, we have certainly a loan payment calculator. Prominently on our website. There's a whole plethora of them on the internet. Find one that's legitimate. I have never found one that's not legitimate, but certainly you can go to UNLV financial aid website, and there's one right there for you. And I think the last one that comes up in terms of a student issue before we start getting into some other things is, why does my graduate assistantship count against me within my financial aid package? Now, this isn't unique to UNLV. This is what all schools across the nation have to do. And the answer is, because the Department of Education says so. And you're like, well, that's not fair. Can I appeal that? No. When the Department of Education says so, they said so, and that's just the way that it goes. So think of it this way. As a GA, depending on the package that you get, and it could vary, most GAs get their tuition and fees paid for, health insurance, and a monthly stipend. So the monthly stipend isn't counted against you in the financial aid package. Why? Because it's considered like earnings, so that would be counted against you on your income tax purposes. Okay, I'm only focusing in on the tuition and fees and the health insurance that you would receive as a benefit as a GA. That a financial aid office has to count as a resource within your financial aid package against you. You're like, well, that's not fair. Well, think of it this way. If the school is paying for those expenses, that is less money that you actually need to borrow in terms of federal student loans. So, in my opinion, the Department of Education is actually doing you a favor by limiting what you can borrow, or by what you think you need to borrow, because someone else is paying for those expenses. So if someone else is paying for those expenses, then you really don't need the loan money to pay for those expenses. You can have the loan money for living expenses, that's not a problem. You just don't need the loan money for your tuition and fees and your health insurance, because the school paid for it. So, whether you think that's right or wrong, that's the logic behind it. Any questions on that? Because we get graduate students every year that just, ad nauseum, argumentative. They either don't get it, or they don't think it's fair, or they want to appeal. It's just like, we're not trying to be mean or condescending. It's just some things we can make an adjustment for, and there's some things the Department of Ed said so. That's the way it goes. All right, so we're going to also hit some of the different types of loan payment options. And I don't expect anyone to memorize these. And in fact, I probably don't have some of these memorized in the details that I should. Because when it comes to loan repayment options, we always try to push that back to the lender, the borrower, who holds that student loan note, because they're really the experts in that, in terms of the loan repayment programs. We're experts in terms of giving you the money, but if there's really questions about loan repayment options, the Congress tends to change those on a regular basis. Sometimes they jack it up, sorry Congress. Sometimes they do a good job with some of these loan programs. So what I want students to get out of this is there's help, there's assistance, and if at least a small kernel of this sinks in for future use, then I think that's good, and that plants the seed to steer you in the right direction in the future. So the standard one, and I'll show you some different examples of this in terms of what you would pay in interest, in principal, and all together. The easiest one is if you can get on a standard payment plan, that's probably the best one. You're going to pay the least amount of interest. It's over 10 years. Yeah, I know it's a long time, but that's the way it goes. So I really like the standard payment plan, but I know that not all students can do this because the more that you borrow, obviously the higher your payment would be. So you can start getting into the graduated repayment plan, where you work with your lender. They'll start you out at this payment per month, and then every 2 years they'll gradually increase it and increase it. So you're paying less in the beginning, and then your payment will get larger and larger. It's almost like I guess you could relate it to like an adjustable rate mortgage, kind of like an ARM, kind of those things where the payment goes up. Then for students that borrow, I believe, over $30,000, you start getting into this extended or graduated payment plan, where instead of paying back your loan after 10 years, you start getting into, up to 25 years? Yeah, up to 25 years, and that's a long time. Now remember, folks, the longer that you pay off something, the more interest you pay. So your payments may be lower, but there's a trade-off, and you'll see that here in a second. There's also the income-based repayment plan. This is relatively new. So I'll just read the first sentence. It's a repayment plan with monthly payments that are limited to 15% or 10% if you're a new borrower of your discretionary income. And there's a lot of little details in between, but that may be relatable to you. Pay as you earn. That's I think the last one we'll go over. Is a repayment plan with monthly payments that are limited to 10% of your discretionary income, which is the difference between your AGI, adjusted gross income, and 150% of the poverty guideline amount for your state and family size, and blah, blah, blah. So you can see there's a lot of the devil's really in the details. And so that's why I say, I'm planning the kernel now, so that way in the future, that this kind of sounds like something that I heard in the past, and I can go research it and see if this is the right plan for me. So here's the table that I was going to talk to you about: the standard, graduated, extended, extended fixed, and extended graduated. These are the ones that we're going to focus. We're not focusing in on the bottom ones because, well, you'd have to know what your income is and those kinds of things. But you can see with the standard, this was borrowing $50,000 at a 4.3% interest rate. For the standard, you would have a total interest paid of $11,606. And so if you borrowed $50,000 over 10 years, you're going to pay back almost $62,000, which is not chump change. You can see if you go to the graduated, the total payback is $64,000, the extended fixed is $81,000, and the extended graduated is $89,000 when you borrowed $50,000. But, we went from 120 months, 120 months, 300 months, 300 months. So you can see why that interest rate went substantially higher as the payment period went higher. You will have to pay these back one day. So that's why I'm really stressing, borrow smart. Really, it's really to your interest and to your family's interest. There are some loan forgiveness programs. The two most common ones, I think that students really kind of hit, are the teacher loan forgiveness and the public service loan forgiveness. Very honestly, the teacher loan forgiveness one I understand, and it's not going to forgive 100% of your loans. It's really up to $17,500. This public service loan forgiveness, I'm still trying to wrap my my head around it. And I've read the regulations many times. So if a director of financial aid is having a hard time understanding this, I imagine what the general public is. So if you work in like a nonprofit, public service, and it can be, I think I've kind of defined it, any employment with federal, state, local organization designated as tax exempt by the IRS. That's probably just the simplest way to put it. Your loan can be forgiven after 120 qualifying payments. So then I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, that's what, 10 years? If I'm on the standard payment plan, what's there to forgive after 10 years anyway? So that's why I'm trying to wrap my, like, how is this beneficial? You know, and even if you spent 5 years in a private and 5 years in a nonprofit, you still made 120 payments. So how is that really, I don't really
It's
understand.
only for unique people in unique situations. You get a job for a non-profit organizations, while you work there, you get your loans forgiveness. Yeah, that's what I do.
But I'm thinking, like, if you're on a standard payment plan for 10 years, and after 10 years, your loan's gonna be forgiven anyway, so why is it
Oh, yeah.
how is this a benefit?
Yeah,
See?
that's it.
Yeah, so, I definitely need to do more research on it.
I have a
and-
question on the teachers loan forgiveness. If you want to be a teacher, you have to take 3 credit hours of teaching.
There is state licensure and read licensures that you have to do every so many years. It depends on the state to maintain your teaching credentials. But with the teacher loan forgiveness, it's just not for everybody. You have to have certain elementary and secondary schools serving low-income families. So, you know, if you're going to be a teacher and work in an affluent area, then it's probably not going to pertain to you. Or if you've got $50,000 in loan indebtedness, but only $17,500 can be forgiven, you know, is that advantageous to you or is it not advantageous? So you know, again, the devil is in the details. There are other loan forgiveness programs that are out there, but a lot of students, just on the nature of the program, it's a very specific, like Peace Corps, AmeriCorps. A lot of our students just don't go into it, but it's an option. There are things for Army National Guard, nurses. The one below at the bottom, death, automatic consideration. Everyone qualifies at some point. Yeah, the feds have actually written that and into the law on death. Your student loans are forgiven. Really? Okay. Cool. I don't really care at that point.
What's the Army National Guard? You have to be part of the members of the Army?
Yeah, you have to be in the Army National Guard. And I looked to see if, like, is there something for, like, other, like, just like the Nevada National Guard or, like, you know, other National Guards? And
What about volunteers in service to America? What's that?
that is I believe, a work program that you go into communities of lower socioeconomic status, and you do, maybe you go in and you, like, clean up a park, or, you know, I don't want to say it's like similar to Habitat to Humanity, but there's like kind of like humanitarian work
So where can
involved.
we find those kind of stuff? On your website?
Just search for that.
Volunteers in service to
Yep. I think there's an acronym. I think they call it, like,
VS?
yeah, like I don't want to say VIS, but there's no P in it, so
Oh, Vista?
Vista. I think
Vista,
that's what it
yeah.
is. Yeah.
Do you have any general strategies for them for finding, to follow your question up, for finding some of these unique opportunities? Like, I know NIH has some debt forgiveness
I know
programs
about
too,
Peace
for example.
Corps, but the AmeriCorps, you have to pay them in order to be part of it.
Really? I don't believe
And
so.
I heard they, because you have to pay them, because last time I tried to join one of those corps, and they said that I have to put out $2,000 or something to be travel to the country that they send me to.
Well, that's interesting.
Well,
I don't know the answer to your question. Certainly do your homework on it and make sure that, you know, it's a legitimate and appropriate resource. Okay, I said we would talk about bankruptcy, so here it comes. Here we go. A lot of folks think that federal student loans and private loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, just a flat statement. That's not true. It's just simply not true. But here's the problem. So the way that the bankruptcy laws were written, it does exempt education loans from being discharged unless doing so would cause you, the consumer, the student, a undue hardship. The problem is, undue hardship isn't defined in the bankruptcy law. So the courts, the judge, I suppose, on the jurisdiction could vary with opinions across the country. So I can tell you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that students have had their loans or partially, either totally or partially discharged in bankruptcy. It does occur. So if you have to do it, talk with your attorney about it and see if you can establish whatever undue hardship is on that. And that's really about all the clarification that I can give you from, I'm not an attorney, I'm not schooled in it, but generically, it can be done. It does occur. Can you consolidate your student loans? The answer is yes, but it depends on the type of your loans. So here's what I want you guys to keep in mind. There's all types of student loans out there. So student loans is just a nebulous statement. What you have to know is who's the holder of your loan? Is it the federal government or is it a private bank? So what you should always want to do is if you have, let's say you went to University of Southern California and you got a loan there as an undergraduate student, a federal student loan there, and now you've come to UNLV and you've graduated and now you get a federal student loan here. It's possible that the U.S. Department of Education sold your loan, your federal loan, to XYZ Bank. And now XYZ Bank is the servicer of your loan. Still a federal loan, okay? Then the loan that you had here at UNLV, the Department of Ed sold to ABC Bank. Still a federal loan. So when you go into repayment, when you graduate from UNLV, you're going to be making a loan payment to XYZ Bank and a loan payment to ABC Bank. And it would probably behoove you to consolidate that loan into one, and that way your loan payment would be smaller. Okay? You're still paying it off, but at the same amount of time, but instead of making a $200 payment here and a $200 payment there, when you consolidate it, maybe it's going to be $320. Okay? And so if you can make both those payments to both, great, do it. If not, then consolidate it. Consolidate federal loans to federal loans. Consolidate private loans with private loans. Why should you do that? Well, on the federal side, the borrower benefits are infinitely stronger and the interest rates tend to be lower than the private side. So if you consolidate a federal loan with a private student loan, you lose all those federal benefits and potentially lower interest rates for the private loan, which tends to be not as good with borrowed benefits. So you can do it if you want, but I don't recommend it. A lot of students talk to me about what's the difference between this loan deferment and forbearance, and I'm like, really nothing. It's just two words that mean the same thing. And this is for students that maybe they graduate from college and the economy isn't good. We saw a lot of students going into forbearance. Remember the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, 2011-ish, those periods. Well, a lot of students were getting out of college and it was really tough finding a job. And on the federal loan side, you can actually call up your lender and say, hey, I'm unemployed or or maybe I'm underemployed. And can you help me out? Can I maybe not make jury duty? And it allows a student to temporarily postpone making their student loan payments or having a smaller payment for up to 3 years. So there's really no reason, if you get out of college and you don't have a job, don't ignore it. Don't go like 240 days and beyond and go into default. That's just a bad thing. When you have this wonderful option, it doesn't cost you anything. Call up your lender and you can remain in good standing. You can protect your credit. So always let your lenders know what your address is. We'll have students that just don't know. They've been to this school, they've been to that school, they've been to that school, and they think maybe they have only 2 different loans, but they've forgot that they had a loan at this other school from 10 years ago, and they really have 3. And they never kept their records updated with their lender. Which gets into this next slide. So where can I find all my federal loans I have borrowed? Now this isn't top secret information. This has always been out there from the Department of Ed. So any student can go to this website, put in some demographic information about themselves, and it will show you every single student loan, every single federal student loan that you've borrowed, and what school you borrowed it at, the dates that you borrowed it, and who's servicing your loan, who are you making your payments to. It gives you their contact information. And you can find all that out right here by going to this website. So look how happy this student is. You know? So this is a really good resource that students have, but it's really underutilized. So with that being said, any questions for me? I know I limited to a smaller topic, and there could be other questions that you guys have, so I'd be more than happy to address them.
I saw posters about research grants and stuff like that to do research. Is that part of the financial aid?
If you get a grant to do research, in my opinion, it depends on how the grant is worded, whether it would be counted as financial aid or whether it would not be considered financial aid. You almost have to read the details. The problem with, I'll just talk about grants and scholarships in general for graduate students. At most schools, in general, it's not very good. And here's why. Because the majority of federal funds in terms of, let's say, grants, those are really directed at undergraduates. The government's goal is to create an educated populace, that is, create as many undergraduate degrees as possible. And so that's where they focus a lot of their limited funds. And once you start getting into the graduate school level, a lot of the good federal grants that the undergraduates would receive, they're just simply gone. The focus for your graduate education is not there like it is at the undergraduate level from the Department of Education. Even a lot of your scholarship donors, a lot of their focus is on undergraduate students. I'm not saying that schools don't get scholarship donors that a scholarship wants to go to a graduate student, but the overwhelming majority of funds for grants and scholarships go to undergraduate students, and graduate students are left to kind of find a grant on their own, a graduate assistantship, and most regrettably, loans.
A lot of schools, they don't even have GA. We even have GA. Some of these schools are not. They don't have that. They only have the PhD level.
Yeah, certainly an important aspect to look at. You know, and those are good questions to ask any financial aid office. You know, what percent of your students receive scholarships, grants, loans, and compare that among the different schools. Now, just don't be focused on that. So let's say school A offers graduate students $5,000 in grants and the rest in student loans. Let's say school B doesn't offer any grants or very limited grants, but it's mostly student loans. Well, what's that cost of attendance? Remember, so those basic educational costs? Well, school A is offering you $5,000 in grants. Don't get focused just on that. Look at what the overall educational costs are, because school A could be $8,000 more than what school B is. And so are you really that much better ahead, because of that? Maybe yes, maybe no.
Kind of following up on that, where would you situate UNLV with respect to some of these other considerations too, like cost of living? Because it can be much more expensive, probably as expensive as anywhere, if you're going to be at NYU or in the Bay Area. But then again, if you're a place like Albuquerque, New Mexico, maybe cheaper than here.
Correct.
So if sort of from your vantage point, what are some of the key considerations you see in terms of the financial pieces that students consider with respect to making wise, financially informed decisions about where to enroll?
The marketing, marketing really resonates with students. So let's use the car example. What sounds better to drive? The Mercedes, the Lexus, the Lamborghini versus I don't know. I'm gonna pick on. I've owned a Chevy. I'll pick on Chevy versus a Chevy Cobalt. I don't even think they make that anymore. So each one will get you from A to B, right? The cost difference getting you from A to B is dramatically different. Okay, the ownership cost of a Chevy Cobalt is infinitely different than a Lamborghini. But again, they will get you to your destination. You know, having studied at many, I've taken graduate classes at, let's see, two institutions. And I thought the graduate instruction at both those institutions were comparable. So I think your school of choice should factor in many things. I think it should factor in name recognition. I do think that counts for employers. I think you should look at the accreditation. Accreditation is out on people's web pages, or what is the school? Well, the school could be accredited, but what are they working on to make them like better versus this other school? So I don't think students should just blindly select schools based off of like name recognition, or my boyfriend or my girlfriend is going there, those kinds of things. I think they need to be very educated and make sound financial decisions, because I've shown within this video that loan indebtedness can get pretty high. And if you go to a school in a high cost of living area and you don't have the money to pay for that, where's that money going to come from? Most likely it's going to be borrowed. And why would you want to borrow more than what you absolutely need to? And that school in that high cost of living area could be very, very good. Or you could find a very, very good school with similar characteristics in a different regional area. Cost of living, in my opinion, in Las Vegas is very good compared to other places in the nation. Is it the cheapest? No, certainly not. But the way that the housing market has been here over the last couple of years, when we determine our room and board costs within our financial aid cost of attendance, it's remained relatively flat. It hasn't really increased in several years.
Can I ask another question? International students, what are some of the considerations specific to international students you see?
You know, international students are really a whole different ball of wax. Financial aid offices tend to not fund them very well. And you're like, well, that doesn't sound good. But you have to understand the nature of international students, where many of them have to show financial strength to pay anywhere between 1 to 2 years in advance. They have to show financial sustainability. So an international student just cannot apply at any institution across the country without showing that they have the means to pay for like an entire full year's cost. I'm not talking just tuition and fees, we're talking like everything. A lot of international students, they also have country sponsorship, where their country will pay for their educational expenses, and it's kind of money in the bank. They've got their country's paying for it. So a lot of them don't require financial assistance. Now, many of them do. Maybe they come here after a year or two and something happens back home and they're like, now what? Can I stay in the U.S.? Can I apply for federal financial aid? The answer is no, because you are a non-citizen. And so they don't qualify for those types of things. There are a lot of scholarship programs that schools have that international students can apply for, unless the donor specifically wrote it in the memorandum of understanding that this should only go to U.S. citizens. That is possible. I've seen those types of things. So international students tend to be limited, just because the biggest source of financial aid funding, if you think about it from a simple terms, is the federal government. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, why should the Department of Ed in our country pay for your schooling? Kind of sounds mean, but when you think about it from the funding sources, that makes sense.
So for students, like we had a PhD student, for example, an international student who used up her 3 years of GA eligibility. And then after that, her costs skyrocketed. Would you have any suggestions or thoughts regarding ways to sort of buffer that as an international student, knowing these are the kinds of things that could happen?
There are student loans that students can receive and borrow. But they're not as good as the federal student loans, because with your federal student loans, most graduate students, they can only borrow with the unsubsidized loan program with no credit check, no cosigner, those types of things. The exception is the Graduate Plus loan, which I won't talk about. But in your case, the international student could borrow from a private student loan bank company and would most likely, I've seen where they most likely need a U.S. creditworthy cosigner. I don't find too many of them accepting a cosigner from outside of the country. And that tends to sometimes be problematic for international students where maybe they've only been in the country for a few years and they haven't really established a lifetime network of close friends or relatives. Maybe they have a relative in the country that's an eligible, U.S. citizen cosigner. So I would, if the student really wants to stay in the attending this institution, they should probably check out that avenue. That's the only one that I can think of. After that, your options are really limited. If there's no scholarships available, or the department doesn't want to find some sort of discretionary funds to help pay for the educational expenses.
There's a sort of a running joke in my college that if you can't go to grad school without borrowing at all, then you shouldn't go at all. Do you think there's any truth to that
That's
statement?
interesting.
They say that because even the smallest loan can turn out to be a real nuisance or even an obstacle.
Yeah, it can be. I think there's truth to that. I was telling Peter earlier that about 70% of all of our students receive some form of financial aid. When you look at all the financial aid that is dispersed at UNLV, that amounts to $240 million. It's huge. Out of that $240 million, I would say 60 to 65% of that is all student loans. And you're like, wow, that's huge. And it is. But you know what? Those statistics are not unique to UNLV. A lot of those statistics are comparable to sister institutions across the country. So let me go back to one of these slides here. Let's go look at what I had online. All right, so this would be graduate school cost. So let's just go and look at tuition and fees, 9 credit hours, because that's what most of our graduate students take. So let's say you've got a job and you can swing the rest. If I took a poll in this room and said, how many of you got $6,000 in the bank right now to pay for 2 semesters of graduate school? Like, raise your hand. I probably would not see a whole lot of hands coming up right now. So I think there is some validity, to that. And if you don't have the money to pay for it, where is it going to come from? Is it going to come from your, do you have my rich uncle? Are you still, are your parents still helping you out? Those kinds of things. We talked about how grants and scholarships tends to be limited, more limited at the graduate school level across the country than it is at the undergraduate level. So, yeah, I would say it's, I hate to use the term like joke, but it's really a reality.
So, in your experience, is there a line that you draw between reasonably priced and overpriced schools?
It's an interesting question, because this video is going to go on the internet, and you certainly don't want to slam, other colleagues within higher education that have higher price schools, because, I think they're a higher price school for a reason. And what does that mean? Does that mean that they have a better student support structure? Do they have higher retention rates that and a stronger infrastructure. Are they a tier one, Carnegie, classification institution where they have this very, very strong support network for students compared to other schools where it's still a strong support network, but the money that they've devoted to this infrastructure in terms of student support, equipment, administration, all those things, raise the cost of attending college. In addition, some states are stronger in terms of supporting higher education than other states. And so those states may have lower tuition versus a state that is less supportive, and they're raising tuition to make up for state shortfalls. So you don't want to just kind of wave that wand and just say like a lower tuition equals less service, because you really have to understand the politics and where the money is coming in and out. Maybe the alumni donation base is stronger in terms of like scholarships. I'll pick on UNLV for a second. We've only been around for I think less than 60 years. Do we have a decent scholarship endowment? Yeah. Do I know what it is? No, not off the top of my hand or my head. But Ohio State, been around since 1870. Bigger school, right? Been around for a lot longer. A lot more scholarships that they can give their students because they have had a way long head start to get their organization up and running than UNLV ever has. So can I say that there's like a true cutoff point in terms of what I think is too high? The answer is really no. I really can't say if you go beyond this, then I don't think that you're getting a good deal. And that's one of the great complexities of higher education, because how do you know if this school is a good deal, and how do you know if that school is a good deal? There's no common kind of shopping sheet, really making these comparisons. There is a lot of like government data gathering, like iPads. There's like what they call common data set reviews online that you can look at. You try to start comparing apples to apples between the different institutions and comparing programs, but you could almost do a research paper on it, trying to figure out and publish it. So usually I'm very direct with answers, but this one I'm going to not be direct because I don't have a good answer.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'll just say, one thing that strikes me is that we have these discussions about the costs of college and how huge these expenses are, but we also see data pointing to the income differentials by educational attainment. So so the higher education you achieve, the data are pretty clear at the federal level.
Yeah.
That your incomes on average are going to be higher, but then you have to start picking apart degrees and programs and
Yep.
the expenses you've incurred to get your specific degree. And you brought up dental before we started.
Yep.
Dental medicine or being a lawyer versus, you're going to accrue more debt, but your abilities to earn more money downstream will be greater. But collectively, this just argues for being really thoughtful, I think.
It
about
does,
investing in your future, but then some futures are worth investing in and maybe some aren't.
Yeah, and the comparison always comes up, and I'm not the first to say this, but the liberal arts versus the sciences majors, right? There's room for everybody in the world. I mean, personally, I don't think everybody needs to go to college. I think that there's jobs for everybody. I think if you want to become an apprentice and you want to do HVAC work, by all means, go ahead and do that if that's what you want to do. Somebody has to do that work. Somebody has to be a college administrator. Somebody has to be a professor and share that knowledge. But but it does come up. Who in general makes more in terms of a lifetime of earnings? Someone in the sciences or someone from liberal arts. And when you start comparing that in terms of like loan indebtedness and how you're going to afford things later in life, that should be a factor in terms of your consideration. I just don't think that students should just go blindly into a major without thoughtful considerations. In my opinion, the days of working through college have been over, and they pay for all your college expenses. They've been over for a long time. Our parents, may have been able to do that if they went to college, but not this generation. If you had to take just to pay almost $6,100 in tuition and fees, And actually, let's do this. Let's look at just the estimated cost of attendance for a Nevada resident, almost 27,000, cost of attendance. What would you need to make per hour just to come up with that? I don't know. It's probably going to be a lot. So that's why I say that really the days of being able to work through college are over, and they've been over for quite some time.
Any last questions?
Just kind of following on what you mentioned about the cutoff with different costs for education. You mentioned basically the difference in like facilities, what they might offer students and everything else. Would you say there's any kind of amount or way to determine like the difference between paying for your education versus buying it?
Paying for your education and buying it.
Because I mean, I know from what I've seen here at UNLV, the cost of tuition is pretty low compared to most places, but at the same time, we push people through the engineering department and stuff, and once they're done with the program, they go out and they can actually get work. It's not, well, you have the name, you have everything else, but what good is it?
Yeah. So talk to me more about paying versus buying your education.
Basically paying for the experience, the knowledge, and everything else versus just buying a degree to go on the wall.
Yeah, okay. So it would be very difficult, I think, to separate out the buying and the paying, just because college in itself is really, it's an experience. I mean, whether you want to pay for it, you're getting it just through natural tendencies of the school. There's student organizations, there's sports, there's athletics, there's intramurals, there's Greek life. So there's people in the public contact areas. Save the whales, save the planet, reduce your carbon. I mean, all those things add to like a collective experience, and I definitely would not be the person that I'm today had I not had those student experiences, just being on campus or meeting with or being with people either similar in age to you or dissimilar in age to you, and sharing collective experiences of your life, whether it's inside or outside of the classroom. So for me, it's I guess knowing what I know as a 48-year-old man, it's difficult for me to separate those out, because they're so tied. They're so tied together. So I guess if you just want to buy a degree, I don't know, go online. Go online and do it. And even with that, you're still getting chat rooms, and people's personalities and their flares come over on the screen, and so you're still kind of getting an experience. But I don't know, maybe that's the way to go if you're more, I don't want to deal with all this other student life nonsense and mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, and I think your question's a fair one.
It's an excellent question.
I think it's probably a different workshop topic, to be honest, but which would be, what are the collective set of things to consider when you're choosing the best graduate program for yourself? And name recognition may be one factor among many. Geography, cost of living, all these other things.
On top of that, it's the more facilities they have and stuff, the more options they have for like research and stuff. But at what point do you actually go from learning to just paying to be spoon-fed is what I'm asking. Yeah. Where would you say the cutoff with that?
Well, for me, I thought like my undergraduate experience was more, I mean, I had great student experience, but in terms of I thought it was more spoon-fed, because I didn't have the relationship that I did with my professors as strongly until I went to the graduate level, and it was awesome. Maybe when I got into my senior year, I started working with professors a little bit more, but at the graduate school level, it was way more intimate than at the undergraduate level. I really felt I was spoon-fed. It's like we're just opening up your head, and we're just pouring knowledge into you, and you're expected to absorb that. And a lot of times you might grasp the meaning, but you just did it because you were told to do it, versus for me, I thought it was just a more intimate experience at the graduate level, which is probably really the way the undergraduate level should be. But on the nature of, having probably, how many did they have at Ohio State at the time? 35,000, 40 undergrads. And maybe 10,000 grad students, something's got to give. It's a fair question. I don't know if I can truly answer it as succinctly or as, or maybe as you had hoped in general. So maybe the people watching it can come up with something.
Well, on that note, well, thank you, Mr. Bedford,
You're
for
welcome.
a terrific presentation and very thoughtful, and gets us, I think, oriented towards some of the key issues with respect to financial aid and scholarships here at UNLV. Very, very helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Appreciate it.